The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, thank you for joining us this afternoon for this Locality webinar. Shortly I shall be handing you over to Lynn and Joe, who are giving a presentation on community-led housing. Firstly, I'd just like to go through a little bit of housekeeping with you. So I'd like to let you know that we will be sending out all the presentation slides that you see on screen today, so you can look through them in your own time. Throughout this presentation, we're going to be pausing to take some questions. So if you look to the left-hand side of your screen, you'll be able to see a control panel, and in the bottom half of that control panel is a box labelled questions. If you type your questions in there, when we pause for questions, I'll be feeding them back to Joe and Lynn to answer. Also, throughout our presentation, we're going to be taking a number of polls, and this is a chance for you and the audience to give some feedback to our presenters. I can see today we've just got quite a small number of attendees, so we'll try and take as many questions as possible, and I shall now hand you over to Lynn for the first part. So over to you, Lynn.
Hi, this is Lynn. I hope everyone can see okay. I'm just going to open this up to a full screen. Disappeared. There we go. Okay, so welcome to everyone who's come along to this webinar today. I'd like to start by saying this is a quick guide to community-led housing. We won't be going into lots and lots of detail, so I hope you're not expecting this to be very technical. What it is meant to be is an introduction to the whole area of community housing. We certainly hope that it will resonate with the projects that you're doing or the work that you're involved in. So, can we start by saying that there are estimated to be 1 million people in this country that want to build or live in a community housing project. But what is a community housing project? Well, simply we're talking about projects that are conceived and or controlled by communities themselves. Why is community housing so important? Well, you've got to look at the situation that's existing out there at the moment in the housing market. According to the National Housing Federation, the average house price in Salford, which is the location of the fictional suburb of Weatherfield, is nearly £135,000. A mortgage would therefore be unattainable for a factory worker like Sally Webster. I'm sure you're all familiar with Sally, who would need to be earning around £31,000 to afford a mortgage, but actually she's likely to be earning less than £19,000. I'm probably complaining about it as well. Actually, in the village of Emmerdale, it would be even worse, with prices in rural North Yorkshire hitting nearly 11 times the average salary. So Marlon Dingle wouldn't be earning anywhere near the nearly £50,000 he'd be needing for a mortgage. Basically, house prices are unaffordable to many sections of the population, and community-led housing can be one of the answers to addressing this imbalance. Another point to bear in mind is availability. Low availability and high house prices. As a country, we're building less than the 250,000 houses we need a year to keep up with demand. Local authority statistics show that one of the outcomes of this is homelessness. Currently, more than 81,000 households were found to be homeless during 2012 to 2013. So that's quite a high number and rising all the time. Community-led housing can help to address this issue. And finally, the type of housing. We could be talking here today about community-led housing that addresses issues such as environmental responsibility, or we could be talking about housing that addresses the way in which people want to live, for example, co-housing. But let's just talk for a minute about starter homes. There is a clear shortage of starter homes. In 1996, the first year that the Office for National Statistics collected figures, there were 2.7 million boomerang children. That's those that move out but return home as their circumstances change. That figure now stands at 3.4 million, a rise of 25%. And being forced to live at home isn't just restricted to young adults. There are a further 500,000 or so people aged between 35 and 64 that are living with their parents, typically still in their childhood bedroom. So you can see that the housing arena is quite complicated and there are a number of problems to face. Our contention here is that community-led housing is the way in which we can take steps to redress the situation. So let's start with a question, people. If you look at the right-hand side of your screen, there's a panel and a little box there, a little headline, sorry, entitled Questions with a plus sign next to it. If you expand that box, you can type in a question to us. Sorry, here, this is what we want to know. What is your involvement with community housing? How are you involved with community housing? What is your involvement? Type your answer into that box there and we'll be happy to read your answers, because we want to know what it is that you're doing out there and how we might be able to help you. What I'm going to do now is pass you over to Joe, who's going to pick up the next section of the seminar.
Hello everybody, hope you can hear me. So my name's Jo Gooding, and just whilst I show my slides, put my slides on full screen, I'll tell you I coordinate the UK Co-Housing Network, but I'm not talking just about co-housing today. We're talking about all different types of models of co-housing. But please do contact me outside of this if you want to know more specifically about co-housing. So what does community housing bring to the mix? Well, these are really important points for any case made by a local authority or a project or a group of individuals that want to take forward a project. First is accountability and ownership. If you live and you work in the community where you're building something, you're not going to build rubbish because you're going to be held accountable for it, not just a year after it's built and people have moved in, but possibly years and years into the future. So you want to know that it's going to look good in 5, 10, 25 years and that your tenants or the people that have moved in are happy. Community housing also brings opportunity. So real local knowledge of an area unlocks opportunities, and that can be finding development, understanding where the real viable brownfield are and how it could work in a local community because of flow of traffic or because of a new enterprise opening, and it can also connect up problems within the community with housing. So perhaps people that there's a particular problem in the community around housing that's suitable for families and schools closing down in a rural area, or housing that's suitable for certain ethnic groups and not being the right size. The scale of community housing allows for human connectivity, and what I mean by this is that again, different governance arrangements, but you're going to have probably direct access, direct contact with the people that either manage your housing or your tenants, and that allows for problem solving way beyond my tap's broken. It can also extend into other parts of lives as well. Set up right, community housing can be a permanent community asset, so you can lock either an equity share or the land of the property is built on into a community trust, into a community structure, so that you're not subject to right to buy. I do say, I've got to caveat this as if it's set up rightly, but that's a huge bonus as we've seen the leakage of affordable housing from our communities. And the different models bring different benefits, and I'm going to go through these a little bit with you shortly, so that you've got more of an idea there of what we're talking about. So, first steps in starting a community housing project. We called this developing the vision. Our planning framework in this country is entirely based around what's economically viable. we rarely ask the question as part of that framework, what's really needed in an area. We might look at what household sizes are needed, affordable housing, market housing. We don't ask the question, how do people want to live? What are the other issues in a community? And I think that's part of what community housing providers tend to bring to the mix, and where they differ from other types of providers. So one of the first questions you need to ask yourself at the start of any project, from whatever angle you're coming at, is what is the main rationale for doing this, and how are you going to go about it? Having a clear vision for the project from the outset is essential. Looking at a range of economic, social, environmental data, but also observing, being part of the community and working out what's needed. Think about the long-term use of what you're building and the longer-term requirements. We know there's some very severe problems on the horizon with climate change, with demographics, and how we're going to look after our older people, and how our older people are going to make a much more, be able to contribute much more proactively to community as well. Think about capacity, think about skills that you have or that you can access, or just recognizing where your gaps are. And to illustrate this, I'm going to start with a really successful example of a community housing project. This is Lilac in Leeds. I would say that their critical success factor is that they had a very, very clear vision from the outset, clear objectives. So Lilac stands for Low Impact Living Affordable Community. And so it's all there in the title. They were absolutely, resolutely determined to deliver that vision, measured the risk, but they also took risks as well. So what we're looking at on your screen here, and I hope everyone can see it because I can't see any feedback, so I hope people can see it. But what we're looking at is Lilac's a community of 20 private homes, and you can see them all on the outskirts of the picture. You can see the beautiful landscape suds drainage system in the middle here, the pond, and you can see the terrace there, which just in front of the common house, which we only see the slight bit of that. But this is when I say risk, it's in a kind of it was a site, brownfield site in Leeds. Didn't look anything like this. It took a lot of imagination, but they measured that risk and they evaluated that site and that it could offer what they wanted to do, both in terms of the build method that they chose, which was highly sustainable and which they were involved in. Other features like affordability and the form of ownership that they have as a community, the mutual home ownership model, which is new, but it's very important to that community. They were driven to deliver that. They also had a really pragmatic approach, kept going at it, responding to feedback, opening up where they had skill gaps, and getting help and support there. So what is the range of alternative solutions available there? I'm going to start by saying at the outset that this sector isn't as small as we sometimes make it out to be. There's 2,924-ish small community housing organisations amongst these different types of models, plus possibly an additional 400 small registered housing associations. What all of these different titles that you see in front of you have in common is that they're not for private profit. They often have an open democratic, well, they will have an open democratic structure, and they're either for the benefit of the community or benefit for the members. And it's the community in any of these examples that's leading the process and controlling what happens. I don't want you to get necessarily over-concerned with some of these titles here. They're all different approaches. Don't worry about the terminology just yet. The different approaches are strengths to this sector, not a weakness. They all have different ways of using property and land to benefit people. And I will now go through a couple. I'm going to give you a very brief overview, but obviously we can pick questions up and we can follow up afterwards if people are looking for more detail. So I've tried to categorize them first into groups of organizations that build, manage homes for other people to live in. I'm going to draw out some of the differences and the benefits here. So development trust, settlement setters and so forth. What you get here is you've got really good experience and knowledge of mixing up mixed-use assets and enterprise. Often development trusts aren't housing specific. They manage and run a whole host of services, functions, community development and events and so forth. And housing is a part of that. So if that's part of your thinking, you will find projects very much that are like that in the development trust movement. Community land trusts are very, very similar, and increasingly you get housing amongst other assets, but they do have a particular specialism around affordability in rural areas. There are urban community land trusts, but if you're looking to create affordable housing in a rural area and you're looking at all the tools and mechanisms and how a community can do that, you'll find lots of help and support there. Self-help housing, it's an odd term, but it's a coalition of projects that are bringing empty property back into use. You have good knowledge about working with private landlords as well as public landlords. Particularly can be on a short-term lease basis, but there are more that are acquiring property and renovating them. There's a whole host of projects there that do fantastic work with employment and training and back to work and skills development, often with groups of individuals that are quite far from the housing market and give a lot of support and help about sustaining tenancies. So a great deal of experience and knowledge within the sort of self-help housing movement. This is a collection of put these two together because they're kind of models where perhaps the community, you're going to be building something that you will be living in yourself and you'll be managing collaboratively. So co-housing, what's the benefits and differences there? So often design influences that are different from housing. How co-housing is all about how do you want to live and live cooperatively and give mutual support within a community. And that question, how do you want to live, often brings out changes in how property is pulled together and having communal facilities that really supports community interaction. And co-housing is at the moment mixed tenure. You've got all mixtures of tenure within that. Cooperative housing, a movement with an incredible history and very variable scale from 2 to hundreds of houses, and you've got a history there, I think, and lessons for any new project around setting up viable scalable projects, and mainly social rented housing. It's an hour webinar, so we can't go through in detail all of the different aspects of the models, but that's not necessarily for you to be worried about at this stage. But I just want to point out in this list that there are other types of community housing models and that they may be better aligned to what it is you're thinking of doing. So we have a poll for you here now, and again, if you look on the right-hand side above the questions box, now we didn't get many questions I don't think last time, so I'm wondering if everybody has found this, but you'll see above that, oh no, you don't need to worry about that, sorry Luke. So poll, I think Luke will be putting up a poll in just a second. Is your mission clear and understood by all that's involved? And if you could vote yes or no in the poll that should be coming up on your screen now. Okay. Ooh, no. 63% of you say no. Well, that's not to worry about. Hopefully, this next part of the webinar will give you some guides about what to do next. 38% of you impressively do know. It'll be interesting to test that. Shall I move on, Luke? Yeah. Okay. I'm just sorry, everybody. A bit of technical hitch there. Okay. Do you have any questions before I do move on? Actually, we did cram quite a lot into that 10 minutes there. just open my question box and see if anything's coming in. No? Oh, hold on,
So
I can see one there.
I can see we've got a few questions coming through, Joe. I can see
Yeah.
Jonathan in the audience is saying he's from an architectural background, and he's looking, can he use co-housing to create passive housing designs?
Yeah, you could use any one of those models to create passive housing. I mean, passive housing, part of passive housing is a fabric-first approach to building the actual property, but that could apply to any one of those models: cooperative housing, community land trusts, and so forth. I think what co-housing brings is that extra dimension of sustainability, because it's you're building a community that's going to be mutually supportive. You're building community facilities which hopefully in how the community operates will help people to share things. You often get community laundries, tool sheds, car share, which kind of builds on the passive house approach into a holistic sort of sustainability agenda.
And I can see Mark says he's a rural housing enabler interested in learning whether community-led housing could offer a route to providing rural affordable housing.
Yeah, perhaps I should take that one. I'm going to be talking a little later in the webinar about community right to build, which was a right that was brought in specifically really with things like community-led housing developments in rural areas. But yes, community-led housing has been used successfully many times to bring affordable housing to rural areas, and in fact I think you'll see that in some of the examples that we're going to pick up on later. Just for information, Locality has many members who are involved in community-led housing projects, as does UK Co-Housing Network, and anyone that's interested in seeing any of those groups and what they're doing is only to get in touch with us, and we'll be happy to point you in the right direction. If there's no other questions just for now, I'll hand back to Joe to carry on with the webinar.
Okay, off we go. Right. So we're going to really briefly cover the first steps of how to start a community housing project. Forgive how blunt this is going to be. There are obviously way more steps involved, but we just want to give you a flavour of what you could be doing first with your idea. Maybe some of you are beyond this, so apologies for that. So a bit of an overview. Sorry, I'm going to have to move my thing here. I can't read that. So first of all, can't emphasize this enough. Find out about different options, how other people have done it. Go to some events that are on. We had a great series of Getting It Built events last year. Provided lots of information, case studies, storytelling, and technical information. That's a fantastic place to find out about different approaches, but also find out what's going on in your area and those type of events. At the end of the seminar, you'll get a whole list of websites, masses of information, tools, resources, connections, and whittle that down to what's in your area if you can, that sort of you think best suits, and go visit some of these projects, which is, I mean, obviously arrange, don't just turn up, but there's nothing beats being in a community housing project similar to what you're wanting to do, talking to trustees, talking to people who live there, and so forth. Going back to the beginning of this webinar, decide your outline objectives and your vision. Don't pass this point until you've kind of done that on a side of A4. We're not talking about reams and reams of academic material here. What is it that you want to do? What need is it meeting? Who are you doing it for? How are the decisions going to be taken? Where is it going to be? What kind of financial capacity do you think you have? Obviously, you can't answer those questions infinitely at this stage, but you can start to at least identify some of the questions that you need to be asking and finding out that best suits your vision. I've worked in this area for a long time, and I've worked with projects that have gone 3 or 4 years and talked to different members of that community or different trustees, and that's not been clear, and I would say that's probably one of the main reasons why projects don't progress. So you've done that. you've kind of got good agreement in your board or your group of friends, community that's emerging. So next you're going to assess the financial capacity and the kind of the local environment. What I mean by that is, so different models. If you're building with a group of friends, you're going to be pulling together what money you have, what money you're going to need, and thinking about affordable housing and so forth, and how you might finance that and where you go to that. And you're going to be looking at different forms of grants and investment and so forth. Do extensive research about what's going on in your community and what your community needs for housing, and don't just think about housing stats. Think about employment, think about education, think about health, think about older people and so forth as well. And part of this story will be engaging with your local authority. There's no getting away from it. They will have housing strategies, plans and statistics, and they will be your local planning authority, which will determine that you can, unless you're doing an empty property project with no planning involved, you're going to have liaison with your local authority. So what's their priorities and what are they looking for, and how's that aligned with what you want to do? So that's a whole bunch of stuff in that area. So you've got your vision. You've checked all those kind of features out, and probably a few more that I haven't mentioned. So next you're going to set a criteria for the type of property or the land that you're looking for your project. Set the criteria first. Very often groups get an opportunity or go head over for tail because they've had this offer from a local farmer, or there's that building that's been underused for ages, but they haven't actually measured their vision and what they can afford to do and how they're going to do it with a criteria. And then you can go out and look for your land. We have on the Co-Housing Network website, I'm sure they're on some of the others, but we have some top tools for finding land and property tips, sorry, not tools, and there's a whole list of those, and I can send that link after that, after the webinar. Some obvious ones are things like Google Maps. Google Maps, you get a kind of an overview of what's behind property, what's underused and so forth. Making friends with your estate agent and really building a relationship there. Working through the local authority list of properties that have been determined as suitable for residential use and so forth. You'll find that on that list. So then you're going to start to draft your business plan and set out some of these areas that above here, these 4 steps: your vision, your capacity, the environment, the property and so forth. And that will be essential as you then start to build your own capacity as a group. You can communicate what you're doing or as an organisation, and you can start to build the partnerships that you'll need with local authorities. Maybe a housing association will be involved as well. Sorry, I'll click back on that and show the next slide. Okay, so this is kind of a hard question, I think, because we've given such an overview of the different models, but it'd be interesting to know of the people that have joined us today, which of these models best relates to your project, to what you're hoping to do. Are you thinking of co-housing, community land trusts, cooperative housing, self-help empty projects, a mixture of the above, or none of the above? So if you look over to your right-hand side in the question box, and could you type in there for us any one of those answers, or maybe something else? Can't see anything yet. I'm scrolling down. Oh, I have to pick up that question. Mixture. Oh, that's good. Lilac, one of the examples I gave at the beginning was definitely a mixture. I should have said it's a cooperative community land trust co-housing project. Didn't use an empty property, but it did use a brownfield site. Okay, I'll go on to the next. Okay. Oh, I've got another one. Mixture co-housing with the CLT. Excellent. That's what we like to see. And is there another one? Okay, so any other questions on the section that we've just covered, or points for clarification?
So, Joe, I can see Jonathan submitted a question and is asking, from his experience, and perhaps you can come in on this too, Lynn, he says that key issues tend to be around land availability and access to finance, And are there any recent updates on these two issues?
Okay, land. I mean, it does depend where you are. I mean, I've worked in some areas of the country where we have where there is no land. I mean, literally islands where you're landlocked, and that's where I think local knowledge comes down. And it's harder the bigger geographical area you're looking for. If you can home it down to a few priorities, really drill down, walk the streets, do the Google Maps, talk to people, and that's how property will get unlocked. If you're that's in a really high value area. The exception of that, I think, is probably London and similar cities like that, say Oxford, London, where you're in a complete bubble and very restrictive policies, and then you've got to be even more creative and really drill down. Finance, we will go through a few options later in the webinar. There's excellent sources of finance for capital finance at reasonable rates, and we've got some different ideas there. I think possibly affordable housing and community access to affordable housing grants and subsidy. If you haven't been able to acquire your property or your land by some means of discounted value, such as an asset transfer or a benevolent landowner or something, then you're looking at, you need to draw in some way of cross-subsidising that or grants to support that, and they're the Homes and Communities Agency are the principal source, and there's not much money coming from there. So yes, yeah, you've got to be creative with that, but projects have done it and are doing it, as we will see.
And I can see we've got a question coming in from John, and I think this relates to your previous slide. He says, is using a mixture too ambitious and complex?
No, you don't need. In some ways, the different mixtures of the models, their titles, and maybe they don't even need to be there. If your vision is that you want to build a community where people are going to live, share, and have certain aspects of, say, co-housing principles, but you want to make sure that's affordable for the long term, so you're going to use community land structures, and actually you're using empty property, and you're going to pull in empty property funding and so forth. No, it's not. I think the difficulty is, and this is that information is spread across too many organisations. It's not in a nice tidy place for you guys to go and access it in the way that you need to, and that's something we need to work on. In the meantime, you need to come to people like me and John Fitzmaurice at Self-Help Housing, and Catherine at CLT Network, and we'll help you navigate.
That's all the questions we've got for the moment, so I'm just going to hand over to Lynn, and Lynn will pick up with the next part.
Hi, it's Lynn again here. I hope everybody can see that. I just need to get my screen to full screen. Let's see if we can do that. Okay, let's try that again. Can't get that to full screen, Luke, for some reason. I'm just going to carry on. Okay. Can you help me there, Luke?
If you're having a few technical problems, Lynn, let's just go ahead with it looking like that.
Okay, fine. Right, so what we're going to talk about now is community engagement and why it matters. Well, let me start by saying community engagement is absolutely key to any community-led housing project. It's the community part of the project that's really important if you're going to get it through, and that is not only the community that's actually directly related to your project, who's going to be involved in it, but the community around the project too. The whole strength of community-led housing projects is in that community, and having support and engagement is really the cornerstone of any community project. So start as you mean to go on and engage as many people as you possibly can from the outset. Make sure that you are truly working towards something that will benefit the community and that it's something that the community wants. As Joe said earlier, it's critical to make sure that you get involved everyone who knows exactly what they're doing and what the project is all about. It's important for other reasons as well. Attracting funding it's very important that you have community support, because funders will make judgments based around the level of community support that you have. They'll want to see that you've done all you can and that you've got clear reasons for how you're taking the project forward and how you've involved the community. Community-led project support funding, for example, has got the level of community engagement right at the top of its list of priorities, so it's very important. And it's not just the public that we're talking about, it's important to build partnerships early on in your process. I think this can't be underestimated. Funders want to see that you have managed to get your partners on board, that you're all clear about what you're doing, that you know what you're working towards. I'm thinking also that it's important for you to try and set up working arrangements or partnerships with local authorities. This can be really key if you're looking at land issues or planning permission issues. Speak to local authorities early on. Make sure you understand the restrictions that are around the site that you're working with. It can pay dividends in the long term. Also, if you've got professionals within your group, such as architects, lawyers, business professionals and so on, that's fabulous, but if you haven't, you need to start looking around early on. I think it's also something that you need to bear in mind is that there are loads of success stories to show how it can be done. So bear in mind there are groups out there that have gone down this process before, and they are around and can show you how they've done it and how it can be made to work. We're starting here with a success story from Witton Lodge Community Association. Now, Witton Lodge Community Association, it's based around a council estate in Perry Common, Birmingham. It was built in the 1920s, and they had houses built out of concrete supported by a steel frame. But as in many of these cases, the houses fell prey to many defects, and by the 1980s they were in extremely poor condition. So in the 90s they were actually facing demolition. By this time there were 4 residents associations set up on this estate, but they were determined to try and do something about this housing. And with a combination of pressure from the associations and a strong will by the council to try and find a solution, they were able to come up with an innovative proposition. Basically, they merged the 4 Perry Common residents associations and 2 representatives from each became the founding directors of a new Witton Lodge Community Association, and out of that has been projects which have grown to include the provision of 167 properties for rent, with more being constructed all the time. It's a very ambitious and flourishing community programme, and they are involved in a whole host of other interesting initiatives that help the local community. Just wanted to say to you that it doesn't always go perfectly easily, and that there are occasions where things do go wrong, but it is important to remember that a community element of your project can be the way to success. I'm going to mention to you Desborough Community Development Trust, who were originally set up to fight a redevelopment plan for the town centre, which they were actually unsuccessful with. But then they, when Kettering Borough Council decided to redevelop the Hawthorns, which is a site of a leisure centre and skateboard park with some playing fields, the Desborough Community Development Trust decided to get involved in that. Now, kind of rather late in the day, they got the whole community involved rather than just the group, but just to show how effective this can be, they were able to put forward a community right to bid on the land. I don't know if everyone's familiar with community right to bid. I'll just talk about it very quickly. Community right to bid is a right that was brought in through the Localism Act, which gives communities a chance to tag land or buildings that they perceive to be of community benefit. Once this process is approved by the planning authority locally, the land or building is listed and cannot then be sold without community groups being given an opportunity to get involved in the bidding process to buy that land or building. In fact, community groups can invoke a 6-month moratorium, meaning that they can build a lot of time into the process, and this can be a very effective mechanism when you're trying to get hold of land that might seem to be unavailable to you in one way or another. If anybody's interested in more information on community right to bid, I suggest you go to www.mycommunityrights.org.uk or get in touch with myself after the webinar. So to put this in context, Desborough managed to launch a successful right to bid on this land, and they were able to show the weight of community support for their plans for the site. Didn't, however, stop the council from going ahead and demolishing both the leisure centre and the skateboard park. But they weren't put off by this, and they, with the weight of yet more community support, managed to go to the council and say, we think you should defer activity on this site. We're going to do a neighbourhood plan and we want you to listen to what the community has got to say. And simply through the weight of the community push behind this project, councillors voted in favour of deferring activity on the site, which was a previously made decision and really very unusual. At the moment, that group is pursuing a neighbourhood plan, and within the neighbourhood plan they're extremely likely to follow a community right to build order, which is something that I'm going to go through again in a little while. If you are interested in neighbourhood planning as a route to setting up policy for community-led housing in your area, again, that's featured on mycommunityrights.org.uk, and I would suggest you have a look at that. I'm going to stop briefly to see if anybody's got any questions on that section that I've just done. If Luke's got any, I'll take them now. If not, I'll continue.
So no questions have come in yet, Lynn, but if we give people a couple more seconds, I can also see that Tessa's asking about financial models, which I think we cover later on in the presentation.
We do. We are coming on to financial models shortly.
Right.
I'm just going to talk a little bit about community right to build, if that's okay.
Yep.
I think community right to build is really important in terms of community-led housing projects. You might have heard the term bandied around. Basically, it's one of the rights that were brought in under the Localism Act. What it doesn't do, I have to say, right up front, is provide communities with a right to build. Okay, so let's get that one out of the way first. What it does do is allow specific, site-specific proposals for community building to achieve an automatic planning permission without going through the traditional means of applying for planning permission. You can use it as part of a neighbourhood plan, or you can use it separately. I have to say it's probably easier as part of a neighbourhood plan. When it was brought in, it was expected to be used mainly for small-scale housing in rural areas, but just as an aside, you can use community right to build to achieve permission to build other community facilities such as playgrounds and shops and so on. I'm just trying to move that forward and it doesn't want to go. Let's try again. Okay, if you are interested in doing a community right to build, I think it's generally most useful in situations where, as a community, you are going through a neighbourhood plan, because a neighbourhood plan is there to allow you to make policy in relation to housing, and pursuing a community right to build order would actually then give you the permission to go ahead and build that that development. I have to point out that it doesn't give you any rights over land that you don't own. So if you go ahead and pursue a right to build in respect of land that's owned by a private landowner or the local council, you don't have permission to go ahead and build on that. You still have to get access to the land through the normal channels. So you have to buy it or you have to lease it and so on. The other time that a community right to build is going to be of use is where a normal planning permission would be likely to run into problems for one reason or another. In those cases, the fact that you've got a community right to build in place will be helpful to you. The reason for that is because it has to go through a local referendum, as you can see there on that slide. Other requirements are that it must be in a neighbourhood area. In other words, a neighbourhood area must have been designated. It must be in general conformity with general planning requirements. It has to be independently assessed. But the point is that it has to go for a local referendum. As long as you can get people on side, you can, in theory at least, push through planning proposals that might otherwise have been stopped at planning permission stage. Just for your information, groups that can pursue right to build orders are parish or town councils or existing neighbourhood forums, local charities and incorporated community organisations set up to benefit the community. So I'd like to ask you, do you think that your organisation might be interested in pursuing a community right to build order? Luke's going to do this, I think, as a poll. So here is your chance to vote. Hopefully you will be able to see that coming up on the screen shortly. Speak to me, Luke. Tell me that's happening.
So that's happening now. So for the audience, you'll see a blue panel on your screen, and I can see that people are currently voting. 60% have gone with maybe, 20% have gone with no. Well, votes are still coming in, so I'll give you a couple more seconds to vote, and I shall go ahead and close it in 2 more seconds, and I shall share those results with everyone. So you should be able to see on your screens now 43% went with maybe, 43% with no, and 14% with yes.
Okay, so that's quite interesting. Community right to build as a whole is well worth a look at. As I say, in many instances where there's an opportunity to take a normal planning permission route, groups will go that route, but it is worth bearing in mind community right to build, particularly in cases where you may run into opposition to a normal planning permission application. I'm just going to touch on now some sources of early funding for groups that are at the start of community-led housing developments, because this is where it tends to be really hard to get projects off the ground, so because of the lack of funding. So hopefully this will be of interest to you. There is currently some funding available through social investment business, community assets, pre-feasibility and feasibility funding, and there's a link there for you to go and have a look at information. I should just point out that this particular pot of funding is only available to groups that are pursuing a community right to bid that I mentioned earlier, or an asset transfer. I'm using a bit of jargon there. I'm assuming people know that an asset transfer is a group receiving some land or a building, usually from a local authority, at a discounted rate, or at for £1 or for a peppercorn rent. If you're going through or looking at going through either of those processes, a right to bid or an asset transfer, in order to facilitate your community-led housing project, you can apply for in the first instance, a pre-feasibility grant, which pays between £5,000 and £10,000 and will pay for your group to basically get to grips with the fundamentals of your project. Is it doable? Is it actually a project that can go forward? So it will help you buy in some legal support, it will help you buy in some business planning support, it will help you answer those early questions. So it's well worth looking at. There is actually a full feasibility fund available as well for housing groups that are further along and are actively using community right to bid or an asset transfer, and that fund pays between £10,000 and £100,000 and allows you to do a much more detailed feasibility report. I'm also going to mention community-led project support, which is one that I referred to earlier. Community-led project support is offered outside of London through the Homes and Communities Agency, and there is the link to it. Community-led project support is a fund which pays for you to cover the costs that you incur in taking a project from the ground to the point of applying for planning permission. So it's a really useful fund. It can cover all sorts of things like architect's fees, business planning, anything that you incur in getting your project from a starting point to the point of submitting a planning application. It will also cover you if you go down the community right to build route. So it's worth having a look at. I should just mention that that fund will be effectively closing in October, so you need to get moving. In fact, the assets pre-feasibility and feasibility mentioned above will close in March of next year, so you need to look at those quickly if you're interested in them. There are two other areas for support that you can look at. Locality itself provides a certain amount of referral support to organisations who are right at the start of the process and really not sure how they want to go. If you get in touch with me, I can provide you with some guidance and advice through one of our partner organisations, the one that's most closely matched to what you're trying to do. So if you're looking, for example, at co-housing, we'd refer you to Joe, who's just been speaking. Or you could look at community land trust. We could refer you to them, and they will be able to provide you with advice and support to help you through those very early stages. There's also a community land trust fund which assists startups with up to £1,500 of support and a potential £4,000 grant. So that's obviously worth a look at. They've also got another fund called Community Land Trust Social Investment Fund, which offers investment finance of up to £50,000 to enable a land trust to prepare plans and commission architects. In that sense, another one worth having a look at. That's only repayable if planning permission is actually achieved. So there is quite a few areas there that you can look at in terms of early stage funding. Joe is going to look at later stage funding in a minute, but I would just like to ask, I'm interested in knowing how many of you have actually done funding applications before, because in order to access any of these funds, you do normally have to go through a full application process, which is pretty much an art in itself. So I'm just interested in knowing how many of you have done that. So if you can complete that poll, I'd be really keen to know. Funding applications, something that every group is going to have to get to grips with at some point in their project. So how are we doing, Luke? Have we got lots of people answering?
So the poll's open now for the audience to vote on, and it looks like it's going to be an even split here, so I'm just going to give a couple more minutes for everyone to vote. I can see the votes are changing. Everyone's still voting, so I'll give you a couple more seconds to finish off voting there. And I'm going to close that one down, Lynn, and if I share the results, we can see that 38% of people voted yes and 63% of people voted no.
Okay, so that's kind of what I would have expected. Generally speaking, with these types of projects, there is less experience around planning applications within the individual groups. The experience around the applications tends to be within the partners or the advising groups. Individual groups are going to have to get to grips with this. It's very important that you get help and advice on how to do funding applications, and you can get in touch with me or one of the other groups in respect of that. Okay, I'm going to leave you to fill in questions in the questions box if you want to, and we'll take those at the end, but for now I'm going to hand back over to Joe.
Okay, hello everybody. I hope you're hanging in there. I'm just going to make this into, there we go. Hopefully you can see that. So how much money will you need? We started off at the very beginning saying think about your financial capacity. Well, that's really hard before you've got land and so forth to even kind of think about what the overall project costs might be. So these are just a few tips to help you along those first stages of the journey. I will mention two sources at the beginning before I put anything on the screen. That's if you're building new build or converting something, take a look at So You Want to Build a House. It's free to download from the Locality website. A lot of it's out of date now. Ignore some of the policy parts of it. It was written before pre-coalition. But the chapter on construction really gives a really good overview of the professionals that you will need to encounter. Who are they? What are their roles? What do they do? What kind of percentage fee can you expect to pay out of your overall costs and so forth? And building, and it works through the different stages of building a house or houses, and helps you with accounting along those lines. Another one is through selfhelphousing.org. Have really good template kind of cash flows and budgets for empty property projects. Again, really good to have a look at and see what people are spending and the different ways of accounting for viability in terms of your income coming in and your rent and your expenditure going out. Good examples on their site. So, how much money will you need? So you're going to need a war chest to go through those early feasibility stages. So, how long is a piece of string? I always think very few projects have I seen need less than £20,000. Some empty property projects can need considerably less, but yeah, £20,000 and upwards is a general kind of experience there. And then look at those sources that Lynn mentioned before. Maybe also add into that, some local authorities actually have enabling funds now, or will support in that way. Awards for all support community engagement, empty property projects. Sorry, the question just came up there. And the Cooperative Enterprise Hub can be quite a good source of funding for those options appraisal part. But look, the sources that Lynn mentioned before are kind of where you'll get your main chunks of money to do the real feasibility work. So the cost of acquiring your property or land. In case of land, options are kind of common, where you agree under certain conditions with the landowner that he will remove it from the market whilst you put your proposal in gear. That shouldn't be costing a great deal. And I don't recommend to community housing groups that that's costing very much but piecemeal, unless in the most extreme situations. The actual acquisition of the property, how that's going to be financed either through grants or through loans, and the cost of that. Your construction costs, I mentioned the two sources there, really good guidance on percentage costs and the different types of professional fees. There you go. But in terms of construction, it can give you some sources on sort of different build methods and average per square meter construction costs. How is the property going to be managed? Is the community trust or the community going to be managing the homes? Would you be contracting with a housing association which might be managing aspects of the property? Or will you come up with some other arrangements with a local social enterprise or so forth? But there's going to be a cost attached to that. And it will depend on the size and type of project and who's being housed as to what those costs will be, but that needs thinking through. Too often in community housing business plans we don't see a lot of attention paid to voids. Maybe that's because they visited projects and people have said how highly successful the projects have been and they've not had a void in 10 years. But you'll need to account in your business plan that the property could be empty for a period, and again the So You Want to Build a House and the self-help housing will give you kind of averages to be thinking about putting into your business plan. And the long-term management maintenance of the property, you'll need to be setting aside a percentage both for unexpected repairs and sort of short-term repairs, and you'll also need to be putting aside a sink fund for longer-term repairs, replacement of windows, kitchens and so forth. There are too few tools to help budget at the moment. Locality hopefully will shortly be launching a really early stages tool for community groups to work through these subject headings. I hope that's going to be on stream soon. There's the Community Land Trust project tool. Some people find it a little bit complex, others find it no problem, but again that's free to download from the Community Land Trust website. Lots of people invent their own. That's why we've tried to work on the Locality one for startup projects. So we need to come to the end now, so you'll get the slides, but I've listed a few ideas there for additional sources of startup funding, but let's click on to capital funding and then finish up. Affordable Homes Programme from the Homes and Communities Agency is probably one of the main sources of grant finance for affordable housing. We can't go into the detail of it, but I'm happy to provide links and talk to anybody who's thinking about this and the different implications, the type of investment rate, how community housing organisations can apply to that fund. I guess what you need to be thinking about if you're thinking that affordable housing is part of your project and you are going to need an additional source of capital funding because you've stretched your loan capacity, you've got certain grants and you've got this gap, is that the next round of continuous bidding will open mid to late summer, and that's where I think it'll be more geared up towards community housing organisations. So I think getting in touch with a network organisation and or a community champion at the Homes and Communities Agency would be a good idea now. A word about loan finance. I've mentioned a couple of sources of social enterprise finance there that are really good and geared up towards supporting community housing projects. They have excellent advisors, particularly Charity Bank and Ecology, who really do know the territory and will be great support for getting your budget in place. It is also worth mentioning that a number of projects have got high street sources of finance, and they're often really quite competitive. I would say they tend to be projects that are maybe a little bit more established or advanced in understanding about borrowing capital finance, because what you don't get from the banks, you might get a cheaper rate, but you don't get any of that wonderful support that people like Charity Bank and Ecology provide. We've seen a batch of really interesting projects in the last couple of years getting capital funding from local authorities, a mixture of grant and loan, majority loan, but local authorities are able to borrow prudentially at quite a low rate because they borrow over a longer period, or there's other types of finance, but that's really worth a conversation with the local authority. And I've mentioned a couple of others there. The recycled materials one's an interesting. There's a couple of places where social enterprises, Crash is one of them. There's another one called Recycle something, and you can, they often have all sorts of materials to do up properties, and that's a huge bonus. At the bottom there I've said watch out for announcements on empty property funding, because we're at the end, we've come to the end of a lot of funding to 2015 and waiting for what's next. Undoubtedly you are not going to get much before the election, but there will be more funding for empty property, and we just don't know what it looks like at the moment and whether there will be a set aside for communities like there was in the last round of funding, or whether it will go through the Homes and Communities Agency, but there will be more. The Department of Health, Care and Specialist Support Fund, if you are looking to, if your community housing project is for older people or for people with certain needs, that's a fund you should be looking at, and I think again looking out for announcements on more rounds of that. Hardly any community housing projects bid into that last time. Partly the timing was awful. I think it was pre-Christmas it came out, month deadline or something. We just didn't know it was coming, but we need to be aware of that for next time. And custom build funding. What else? I can't see that. Big Potential, the new big lottery fund, and the Urban CLT pilot project all kick off in the summer, and they will all be good sources of funding for capital and maybe a dash of revenue there. Not custom build, but Big Potential and the Urban CLT might be able to provide support in additional to capital funding. Okay, I can see we are kind of really out of time now, so I just want to close by drawing your attention, just kind of talk about a really positive example, and that's Glendale Gateway Trust in Northumberland. It summarises a lot of what we've been talking about in terms of good practice today, and brings together an awful lot of learning. What you can see hopefully on your screen to the left is an old library building, which has been converted into 2 affordable homes right on the high street. The asset transfer of the library building enabled that to happen at a very low cost, and the library then has moved into the picture on the right-hand side, which is their this kind of a multiple-use community centre with business space, lots of community activities. Those are business pods in the front. I close with this because it's a project that's applied for affordable homes funding. It's become a registered provider. It's a really small rural trust. It's got mixed assets, so you've got, I don't know, I think they're up to about 15 homes, a mixture of homes and flats above shops. They also have shops, a youth hostel. But they don't, they're not a massive organisation with masses of officers and so forth, but they have had a very clear vision, and their vision was that they were going to bring back to life the high street, which was dying. They were going to animate the empty properties that nobody wanted to touch, they weren't viable, but it's their community, and they were determined to do that. They recently launched a bond for the community to buy in for their latest empty homes project. So if you look at their site and you look at the project, you'll see a mixture of all that we've talked about today, and it's kind of neatly compacted into that project. To end that trust of all those different assets and enterprises that they run, housing now contributes a significant proportion to of their income. This allows the trust a great deal of freedom in how it then reinvests back that income in, whether it's more housing or other types of services that are needed in the community. And the trusts say that that's one of the easier part of the assets and enterprise that they run. It doesn't cost them as much as it does in terms of the return, which is another important point. And I'm going to finish there. There is a bunch of organisations here that will be able to help with your projects, but I really advise getting in touch with somebody who works for them to help you navigate the masses of material that's out there. So, Luke, can I hand over to you for this last poll?
Yep, so we're going to run this last poll, and we're just asking, from seeing the presentation and the information presented to you today, do you feel better informed about CLH as a result? So I'm just going to open up the poll now, and if you'd all like to go ahead and vote by clicking on your screen, so I can see some of you are voting there. Results are starting to come in, so I'll give you a little bit more time. I can see a few more votes are coming in, and I'll give you a couple more seconds before I share the results. So the last few results are coming in. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, and I can see that the majority have answered, 56% have answered yes, and 44% of people feel a little better informed. So I would like to thank everyone who's joined us today. This is the end of the session now, but I would like to remind you all that we will send out the slides that you've seen on screen today. I'd also like to let you know that on the 16th of July is our next webinar. The subject is on pensions, and it's going to cover auto-enrolment. It's going to contain lots of practical advice and guidance. If you'd like to register for that, you can do so at locality.org.uk/events. And also, as I mentioned earlier, any questions that we didn't get time to answer today will be passed on to our advice team, who will be in contact with you. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and I hope to see you at the next session. See you later.
Bye.